If you were told the world is flat over and over and over again, would you believe this brainwashing despite, when compared, the directly related facts are in contradiction? Unfortunately, I know you would believe it. My name is Ken Minton. I'm here today to challenge something else that when compared makes no sense. That is, I'm here to challenge the fundamentals of science versus philosophy as presented by the educational business. Bear in mind, this thinking is sold worldwide. It is assumed to be correct, but if the fundamentals of Western thinking are incorrect, confusion becomes a certainty. Let me make this perfectly clear. The world's population, including the PhDs who created the educational business, are all extremely confused. In order to counter this confusion, let me begin by asking a question. How do we know anything is true? That is, how do we separate out nonsense from what is real? To answer this, let me present an example. For instance, how do we know that 3 plus 4 equals 7? First of all, we need to define the quantities of 3, 4, and 7. Then we need to define the words plus and equals. Upon agreement of these definitions, we must next compare the combined values of 3 plus 4 to the value of 7. And of course, these values are equal, but we know this to be true, thus consistent with reality, only by comparison. It is not defined that 3 plus 4 equals 7. Let me emphasize this vital point. The truth is only verified by comparison of information. There is no other method for separating out nonsense from what is real. Yet the educational business rewards students for blindly memorizing mostly useless data. And if you erroneously believe college teaches students how to understand reality, please consider the following comparison. A history major, an accountant major, a marketing major, a PE major, a philosophy major, and a science major. Other than taught language skills, there are no common courses. Thus, college is purely vocational. But you might ask, what about critical thinking? By definition, critical thinking is the objective analysis or breakdown to form, breakdown and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment or a conclusion. However, without comparison thinking, how are the breakdown facts actually determined? Furthermore, the closest the educational business came to presenting comparison thinking was the presentation of Socrates and his Socratic method for looking for argued inconsistencies. But without comparing information, as I suggest, how is it possible to view the inconsistencies? Instead, the academics present, I think, therefore I am, as a fundamental of truth. This conclusion was originated by Descartes in the early 1600s. But how did Descartes know with absolute certainty he was not someone else in a dream state at that very moment? That is, when we compare the dream state to the awake state, uncertainty is revealed. Thus, this fundamental presented by the academics is arguably wrong. And of course, the average person does not challenge his own existence anyway. But do the fundamentals of science versus philosophy make sense when details are compared? Let us review the factual history of Western thinking. The first person to be associated with Western thinking was a mathematician named Thales from Greece. The date was about 600 BC. Thus, Thales became the first Western quote-unquote philosopher. But what is philosophy? By definition, philosophy is love of knowledge. However, I ask the critical question that the so-called great thinkers failed to ask. Knowledge of what? The correct answer, knowledge of reality. That is, knowledge of reality Past, present, and future should have been the focus in order to avoid fictional nonsense. But instead, the institution of academics incorrectly divided the study of reality when 2,000 years later they separated out the study of nature from everything else. As it turns out, it was a decision made by Immanuel Kant and his colleagues during the 1700s. Bear in mind, they were already paid professionals. Please understand, philosophy had become a business. And what is the purpose of a business? It's to make money. It's not an objective pursuit of truth. So the mistake was certain paid experts would study nature, while other paid experts would study everything else. But all the experts would be paid. Consequently, what is currently presented as science evolved from the study of nature, but philosophy never morphed away. Thus, the study of a cause and effect reality system was cut into, creating compartmental thinking. However, it's not everything else, including human behavior, ultimately a product of cause and effect nature. Thus, this demarcation makes no sense. But what other demarcations could separate science from philosophy? Let us consider science is represented with math, while philosophy is not. However, please remember Thales, the first Western philosopher, was in fact a mathematician, as was Descartes and many, many others. Furthermore, as it turns out, all cause and effect can be measured with an algebraic equation, whereby directly related factors cause the resultant effect. Thus, any pursuit of the truth requires a fundamental understanding of algebraic equations. Thus, a demarcation of math versus no math makes no sense. Now, let us consider another demarcation. Philosophy represents the big picture, while science represents the small details. The problem with this demarcation is the fact philosophers have weighed in on small details such as a priori. A priori is a detailed fact regarding pre-learned human motivation. But psychologists representing science also study human motivation. Consequently, when compared, the science versus philosophy demarcation is again contradicted.